There is a particular kind of silence that only comes to people who have stopped expecting rescue. It isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It settles into a house like frost settles into a window pane, slow, patient, permanent. And the woman in this story knew that silence better than she knew her own name by the time the door came apart. I've hauled freight over these mountains for 31 winters. I've buried men I liked and a few I didn't. I've seen what the cold does to a body and worse, what waiting does to a soul. But I have never, before or since, seen what I saw the day a half-wild trapper put his shoulder through a barred door because he'd counted the smoke from a chimney and found it wrong. You're going to want to know whether she was saved. I understand that. We all want the clean version, the one where the strong man arrives and the story folds up neat as a letter. But I'd ask you to stay with the harder truth instead, because the thing that broke down that door wasn't just a man. And the thing that grew in that cabin afterward took a great deal longer and cost a great deal more than any single act of strength. So sit with me a while. Let the fire burn down. I'll tell it the way it happened, and I'll trust you to feel the parts I can't say out loud. I was still 50 yards down the draw, boots punching through crust that had frozen and thawed and frozen again into something that wasn't quite ice and wasn't quite snow, when I heard it. A long, splitting groan of green pine and iron nails giving way all at once. My mule stopped dead. I've never known that animal to have a lick of sense, but she knew something I didn't yet, and she planted her feet and would not go another step. I looked up the rise. There was a man at the Hartwell cabin, a big one, dark against the white, with his shoulders set into the plank door like he meant to move the whole mountain and start with this. I saw the door bow inward. I saw it hold. I saw him step back, and I swear I felt the ground take it when he came at it the second time. The wood let go. He went in half falling, the way a man goes through a thing that finally stops fighting him, and then he was gone into the dark mouth of the doorway, and there was nothing left outside but the broken door hanging by one hinge and swinging, and the wind and me, standing there with my heart going like a hammered drum, and my rifle still slung useless across my back. I want to tell you I ran. I'm 62 years old and I have a knee that predicts weather better than any almanac, and what I did was more of a lurching hurry, but I got up that rise faster than I had any right to. Now I should back up. You don't just come upon a scene like that. You get there by degrees, and the degrees matter. I'd started up from the flats 4 days behind schedule. There'd been a relief party organized in town, doctor and a sledge and 3 men with better legs than mine, because word had come down before the pass closed that old Thomas Hartwell had taken a fever bad. His girl had ridden down herself in the last of the good weather to fetch help, and then ridden back up because she wouldn't leave him, and the plan was the doctor would follow inside 2 days. Then the pass closed. It closes like a fist, that pass. One night of the wrong wind in there is simply no getting through, and the doctor, a sensible, frightened man, sat in the warm and said what sensible, frightened men say, which is that no one could be expected to cross it, and that they would go up the moment it opened. It didn't open for 11 days. I know because I kept the count in my tally book. I keep everything in that book: grain weights, the price of nails in Cheyenne, the days it rains, the days somebody dies. It's a foolish habit, and my late wife mocked me for it for 30 years, and I have never once been able to stop. I had written, in my cramped little hand, Hartwell girl waiting, and then a mark for every day, the way a man might mark the days of a sentence, and I hadn't even known I was doing it until the marks ran to 11, and I found I couldn't sit in the warm any longer with them staring up at me. So I went alone, ahead of the party, against advice, with a mule and a sledge and a fool's certainty that 11 days was too many. The pass had softened just enough. I nearly died in it twice. I will not pretend I went for glory. I went because those 11 little pencil marks would not let me sleep, and a man past 60 learns to obey that feeling or drown in it. And that is how I came to be standing in the draw when the door screamed. I reached the threshold gasping. Inside, the cabin was dim and close and smelled of wood smoke gone stale and of sickness, that Swedish, low, terrible smell that gets into the timbers of a house and does not leave. My eyes took a moment, and then they found her. She was standing in the far corner with a fireplace poker held out in front of her in both hands, and she had it pointed at the mountain man's chest, and she was not screaming, and she was not crying, and I understood in one long cold second that this was worse than either. "Get back," she said. Her voice came out of her like something dragged over gravel. She hadn't much used it in days, I'd guess. She was maybe 25, though the hollows under her eyes had aged her past that, and her dress hung on her the way clothes hang on a scarecrow, and her hair had come half out of its pins, and she hadn't the strength or the reason left to fix it. The poker shook in her grip. Not from fear, I don't think. From plain exhaustion. A body only has so much to give, and hers had given nearly all of it. The mountain man stood very still. I'd expected I don't know what, a brute, a thing. He was enormous, that was true, a head taller than me and built like the trunk of something, with a beard gone gray at the edges and a coat of stitched hides that had seen more winters than I had, and his hands, God, his hands were the size of skillets, and one of them was bleeding freely where the door had torn it open. But he wasn't lunging. He wasn't roaring. He had gone down onto one knee, slow, the way you'd lower yourself in front of a frightened animal, and he held both those enormous ruined hands out flat and open where she could see them. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said. His voice was strange, soft in a way that didn't match the size of him, and rusty, a man who lived alone and spoke to no one. "I seen your smoke," he said. "For days now it's been wrong. A dying fire day after day, nobody stoking it right. And then this morning it near went out." He swallowed. "A person tends a fire different than a body that's given up. I know the difference. I broke your door because I thought, and here the great voice caught on something and had to work its way past it, I thought I'd find you the way I found." He didn't finish. Whatever he'd found once in some other cabin, in some other winter, he folded it back up inside himself and put it away. The poker lowered maybe an inch. "My father," she said. And she looked then, toward the bed against the wall, and I looked too, and I saw the shape under the blankets that I had not let myself see when I first came in, and I knew from the stillness of it and from the awful patient smell in the room what it was, and how long it had been, and I felt the strength go out of my own legs. Thomas Hartwell had been dead some days. She had been alone in that cabin with her father's body, feeding a dying fire, waiting for help that everyone in town had privately agreed could not come, and she had not broken. Not entirely. She had kept the poker by the door because a woman alone learns to keep something by the door. She had kept herself alive out of nothing but the animal refusal to lie down. And I understood that the smoke the mountain man had watched grow weaker each day was not a fire failing. It was a person failing, one log at a time, deciding each morning to be alive for one more, and the mornings had grown very hard. "He passed on the fourth day," she said, flat, reciting it the way you recite a thing you've said too many times inside your own head. "I couldn't, the ground's frozen, I couldn't dig, and I couldn't leave him out for her jaw worked. So I kept him in, and I kept the fire low so the cold would so he wouldn't." She stopped. She had been managing the body of her own father like a problem of firewood and temperature, because that was the only way a mind can hold a thing that large, by breaking it into things that small, and I have thought about that more nights than I can count in the years since. The mountain man made a sound. Low, grief has a sound, and that was it. I stepped forward then. My boot scraped and she swung the poker toward me fast, and I put my own hands up. "Easy now, easy." I heard my own voice go gentle in a way I hadn't used since my wife's last winter. "My name's Wheeze Corley. I frayed over the sawtooth. There's a doctor and a party 2 days behind me. Girl, they're coming, they've been trying to come. Nobody forgot you." That last was a kindness and not entirely true, and I think she knew it, and I think she was too tired to hold it against me. "You're Eliza. Your daddy talked about you when I hauled through in the fall. said his girl could shoot the eye out of a jackrabbit and had a temper like her mother, God rest her, and that he was the luckiest broke old man on the mountain. Something crossed her face, the first crack in it. Her father talking about her to a stranger, proud, alive, in a warm autumn that must have felt now like something she'd dreamed. The poker came down. It didn't drop. She wouldn't let herself drop it. Some last thread of pride wouldn't allow the collapse to be that complete. But she lowered it, deliberate, and set the point of it against the floor and leaned on it like a cane, and I saw exactly how much of her weight it took. 2 days, she said. 2 days, I said. Maybe 3 with the pass how it is, but they're coming. She nodded, and then she said the thing that I have never forgotten, the thing I wrote in my tally book that night by firelight and have read again every winter since. I stopped believing anyone was coming on the 7th day. It's easier after. You think it'd be the opposite, but it's easier once you stop. I didn't have an answer for that. I'm not sure there is one. The mountain man rose from his knee. Slow. He kept his movements small and deliberate in that little room, a big man who had learned to make himself less, and he went to the cold stove and looked at it and then at the woodpile near empty. And then he looked at Eliza and asked with those rusty words whether he might build the fire up proper. Not I'll do it. Whether he might. He asked her leave in her own dead father's house, because he understood, somehow, animal that the town thought he was, that leave was one of the only things she had left to give, and that a person who has had everything taken needs badly to be able to give something. She said yes. And the mountain man built up that fire the way you tend a thing you loved, feeding it slow, coaxing it, and the light of it grew and pushed the shadows back into the corners. And for the first time in, I would learn, nearly 2 weeks, the Hartwell cabin got warm. His name was Amos Vance. I got that much from him that first afternoon, and not a great deal more, because Amos Vance was a man who'd spilled more words in the last hour than he ordinarily spilled in a season, and it had cost him. He'd trapped and hunted the high country above the Hartwell place for going on 9 years. He lived in a dugout and a lean-to a hard 3 miles up alone, and the town knew him the way towns know such men, a shape glimpsed at the edge of things, a name spoken with a little weight of superstition, a story or two that had grown in the telling. The mountain man. Half the children in the flats had been threatened into good behavior with his name. And this was the thing about him. This was the thing I turned over and over. A man like that, a man who had made his whole life out of not needing anyone, out of being needed by no one, that man had spent 4 days watching a stranger's chimney and reading the smoke like scripture. For days he'd noted the fire going wrong. And on the morning it near failed, that man who never came down and broke a door with his body, and knelt on the floor with his hands held open to a woman pointing steel at his heart, and asked her leave to light her stove. I have known a great many men who called themselves good. I have known damned few who watched. That's what it is in the end. Most of us don't fail at rescue. We fail at noticing. We are all of us too busy being sensible and frightened in the warm to count the days somebody's smoke has been running thin. Amos Vance noticed, and the noticing is the whole of it. The broken door was just the loud part. That first evening we did what needed doing. There is always, mercifully, work to be done, and work is the thing that carries the living through the hours the grief would otherwise fill. The mountain man went out into the last light and came back with an armload of deadfall and split it against the block, and the steady chock of the axe was somehow the kindest sound in the world. I saw to the mule and the sledge, and hauled in what supplies I'd risked my neck to carry, flour and salt pork and coffee, and thank God, coffee. Eliza sat by the fire she'd been starving for and drank the first hot coffee she'd had in 11 days with both hands wrapped around the cup and her eyes closed. And she wept, finally, silently, without any sound at all, the tears just running down and dropping off her jaw, and neither of us made any move to comfort her, because some weeping is not asking for comfort. Some weeping is just a body finally allowed to set down a thing it has carried too far. We did not speak of the body that night. It lay where it lay under its blankets, and the fire was kept. Amos saw to this without a word on the low side, away from that wall. In the morning we would face the frozen ground. But that first night we let Thomas Hartwell rest, and we let his daughter thaw, and we let the mountain man sit in the corner farthest from the door with his ruined hand wrapped in a strip of my clean shirt, watching the flames, saying nothing, having said everything already with his shoulder against the pine. I'll tell you the moment I knew what kind of man he was. Not the door. The door was strength, and strength is common enough. It was later, deep in the black of that first night, when I woke because my knee had woken me the way it does, and I lay still in my bedroll on the floor, and I heard, very low, the mountain man's rusty voice. He was talking to Eliza. She'd not been able to sleep either, of course, how could she? And she was sitting up wrapped in a blanket, and he was telling her in that halting way why he'd truly come. 9 years back, he said, before the mountain, he'd had a wife. And the winter he lost her he'd been 3 days ride off, working, chasing money, and the fever had come to their little place while he was gone, and there'd been no one to note the smoke run thin. He'd come home to a cold chimney. He'd never spoken of it to a living soul. He'd gone up the mountain after and stayed up it, and made himself a man with nothing to lose so that he could never lose it again. So when I seen your smoke go wrong, he said, and I could barely hear him, I wasn't going to be 3 days late a second time. Not for a stranger, not for anybody, not ever again. He hadn't broken down that door for Eliza Hartwell. He'd broken it down for a woman 9 years dead. And Eliza, I heard her draw a long breath in the dark. Eliza said, "Then we've both been keeping fires for the dead." I have never in my life heard two people understand each other so completely with so few words. I lay very still, and I did not let them know I was awake, and I felt, God help me, like an intruder in a church. Morning came hard and blue and murderously cold, the way the clearest mornings do up there, and it brought the second reckoning, the ground. We had a man to bury, and the earth was iron. You cannot dig a grave in frozen mountain ground with a shovel. I have tried in my life, and it is like trying to dig into the side of a boulder. What you can do, what we did, is build a fire on the spot and burn it down again, and thaw the earth a hand's breadth at a time. And it is slow, brutal, all-day work. And it is a strange and terrible thing to warm the ground with fire so that you can put a man cold into it. Amos picked the spot, a little rise east of the cabin, where a lone twisted pine stood, and where, he pointed out in his few words, the morning sun would reach first come spring. Eliza stood wrapped in her blanket and looked at it a long moment and then nodded, and I understood the choosing of that spot was itself a gift he was giving her, and that she knew it. We burned the ground all that day. And here is where I must tell you about the decision, because you were promised, up front, an emotional weight, and this is where it fell, and it did not fall the way you'd expect. Along toward afternoon, with the grave half thawed and the light already thinking about leaving the way it does so early up high, the wind changed. I felt it before I understood it. Amos went still with an axe in his hands and lifted his head like a wolf and looked west, and I looked where he looked, and there was a wall of gray coming over the far peaks, slow and total, and I knew that color, and so did he. Another storm, a big one, 2 days out, maybe less. And Amos Vance turned to me and said the thing that split the day open. The party can't cross ahead of that. Dr. Sledge 3 men. That pass'll close behind this one, and it'll stay closed a month. He looked at Eliza, who had gone very still by the half-dug grave. She can't be up here a month. Not now, not after. He was right. I knew he was right the moment he said it. The relief party I'd raced ahead of was going to hit that storm at the base of the pass and turn back, sensible and frightened, and they would be right to turn back. And Eliza Hartwell would be sealed up on this mountain with her grief and her ghosts for 4 more weeks in the dead of winter, with a broken door and a near-empty larder and a mind already worn down to the thread. There was one way down ahead of the storm. My sledge, my mule, and a hard, dangerous run at the pass now today before dark, before the wall arrived. It could be done. I had done worse coming up, but it meant leaving. And that was the decision, and it was hers. Because the grave was not finished. Her father was not yet in the ground. To take the run down the mountain and live meant leaving Thomas Hartwell unburied in the cabin, to be seen to in the spring or not at all. It meant walking away from the one thing she had kept herself alive 11 days to do, and to stay and finish it, to give her father the burial that had become the whole meaning of her endurance, was to be walled up on the mountain, and Amos would not say it, but I will. It was very likely to die there. She stood by the half-dug grave with the wind rising and the gray wall coming, and she looked at the shape she had guarded and warmed and grieved, and she looked down the mountain at the living world, and I watched a woman make the hardest arithmetic there is. I opened my mouth to tell her the grave didn't matter, that her father would understand, that the living come first, all the sensible frightened things. Amos put his skillet of a hand on my arm and stopped me. "Let her choose," he said very low. "It's the last thing that's hers, don't you take it too." So I shut my mouth. God forgive me for having opened it, and we let Eliza Hartwell choose. She looked at the grave a long time. And then she knelt at the edge of it in the snow, and she put her bare hand flat against the thawed black earth we'd fought all day to open, and she was still for the length of a held breath, and I could not hear what she said to him, and I have never wanted to. Then she stood. "Finish it," she said. "We finish it and then we run." I started to say there wasn't time for both. "There's time," she said, and her voice had something back in it that had been gone since I'd walked through that broken door, some iron of her own, her mother's temper her father had bragged on in the warm autumn. "We three and the fire and we go fast. There's time. I did not keep him whole for 11 days to leave him in the spring rot. He goes in the ground first, then I'll live, not before." And Amos Vance looked at her. I watched him do it. And there was something in that hard, wrecked, solitary face that I can only call recognition, one endurer beholding another, and he picked up the axe and he said, "Then we'd best not waste the light." We buried Thomas Hartwell as the storm wall ate the western sky. We got him in the ground with the last of the day. I will not pretend it was gentle work or that we did it the way a man ought to be buried, with time and words in a proper box. There was no box. We wrapped him in his own blankets and the 2 good hides off Amos's back, and the mountain man carried him out, carried him like he weighed nothing, like he was carrying something holy, and we laid Thomas Hartwell into the black wound we'd burned into the frozen earth, and we shoveled it closed with hands that had gone past feeling. Eliza said the words. Not many. She wasn't a churchy woman and neither was her father, she told me later, but she knew the one about the valley of the shadow, and she said it low and steady into the rising wind. And when she got to the part about fearing no evil her voice did not break, and I understood that she had already walked through that valley for 11 days and come out the far side, and there was nothing left in it to frighten her. Amos set a flat stone at the head of it, and with the point of a knife in the last light, scratched the name and the 2 years. The one Thomas Hartwell was born and the one he died, and nothing else, because nothing else would hold in the stone or in the cold, and because the 2 people standing over that grave already carried everything the words would have said. Then we ran. I have made hard crossings of that pass. The run we made that dusk ahead of the storm is the one I measure the others against. The mule went half mad with the smell of the coming weather, and I could not blame her. The light failed. The first outriders of the wind came screaming through the gap and flung ice like grape shot, and the trail, such as it was, vanished under drift faster than we could read it. Twice the sledge near went over into the black below. Once Amos went into his chest in a drift that had bridged over a gully, and I truly thought we'd lost him. And it was Eliza, small, starved, 11 days broken Eliza, who threw herself flat and got a grip on his coat and would not let go, and between the 2 of us and his own great strength we hauled him out, and he lay in the snow a moment and looked up at her and said, "You've got a hell of a grip for a ghost," and she laughed. She laughed, out there in the teeth of it with her father 4 hours in the ground. It came out of her cracked and wild and only lasted a second, but it was a real laugh, and I heard in it the first true sound of a person who was going to live. Humor in the worst of it, I've come to believe it's not weakness or denial or disrespect. It's the noise the will makes when it refuses to die. Amos's little dry joke, flat on his back in a drift, and her wild laugh answering it. That was two people deciding, out loud, to survive. I put it in the tally book that night with my hands still shaking too badly to write straight. We came down off the pass at full dark into the lee of the mountain, out of the worst of the wind, and the storm closed the gap behind us like a door swinging shut, that same iron fist closing that had trapped her 11 days before. But this time we were on the right side of it. We made a miserable frozen camp under an overhang and got a fire going, small and precious, and we three sat around it too, spent to speak alive, with the mountain roaring shut above us, where a fresh grave lay under a twisted pine that would, come spring, catch the morning sun first. We'd beaten it by an hour, maybe less. I would like to tell you the story ends there. Rescue accomplished, the strong man and the grieving woman and the old freighter down off the mountain, the fire lit, the danger past. That's the clean version, the one that folds up neat as a letter. But I told you at the start I'd trust you with the harder truth, and the harder truth is that coming down off the mountain was the easy part. What grew afterward took longer, and it did not grow the way you'd think. We got to the flats in 3 more days. The town took Eliza in. There is that about a town. It will let a person die of neglect 11 days up a mountain, and then near smother them with casseroles the moment they're safe and visible. And I have never decided whether that's hypocrisy or just the sad, clumsy shape of human decency, which is very good at the near thing and very bad at the far one. The doctor came and fussed over her frost-nipped fingers, which she kept, all of them. The sensible, frightened men of the relief party, who had indeed turned back at the pass, came to pay respects and could not quite meet her eyes, and she let them off easy, easier than I would have, and I think that was less forgiveness than it was that she had simply moved past caring what they'd failed to do. And Amos Vance went back up his mountain. That's the part nobody expects. That's the part that isn't in the clean version. He didn't stay. He didn't court her. He didn't melt his 9 years of solitude into a fireside and a ring. He saw her safe to the flats, and he stood in the street in his stitched hides with the whole town staring at the mountain man come down among them, and he said his few words to her, and he turned and went back up into the high country alone. I watched her watch him go, and I saw on her face something I didn't have a name for at the time and have puzzled out only slowly in the years since. It wasn't heartbreak. She wasn't a girl in a story losing her rescuer. It was understanding. Because she knew, she of all people knew, that a man does not undo 9 years of a certain kind of grief in 3 days on a mountain, and that Amos Vance had come down to break a door, not to be fixed by what he found behind it. He had watched her smoke and he had saved her life, and in doing it he had, maybe, for the first time in 9 years, done the thing he could not do for his own wife, and that was a debt in his own soul he'd needed to pay and had paid, and it was not the same thing as being ready to live down here among the casseroles and the starring and the warm, frightened people. Not yet, maybe not ever. And she loved him too well already, or respected him too well, and I've never been sure there's a difference in the ones that last, to ask him to pretend. So she let him go. And it was, I think, the second hardest thing I watched her do, and it came from the same iron as the first. Now here is where I could end it on that ache. The two of them parted, each having given the other something and neither able to keep it. Bittersweet, tidy in its own sad way. But life is not tidy, and Eliza Hartwell had never once in this whole account done the tidy thing. She did not pine. She did not wait at a window. She took her father's little place, The deed came to her clean, he'd left it to her plain, and she did not sell it and move to the flats where it was safe, though everyone in town assumed she would and several told her she must. She went back up. Come spring, when the pass opened, Eliza Hartwell loaded a mule of her own and went back up the mountain to the cabin with the door I'd nailed back on rough, to the grave under the twisted pine that had, just as Amos promised, come green and caught the morning sun before anything else on that slope. And she stayed. She meant to run the place. A woman alone up there where she had nearly died. Everyone said it couldn't be done, said it was grief madness, said she'd be dead by the next hard winter. She wasn't. I know because I freighted her supplies 4 times a year for the next 11 years, and she paid on time and drove a harder bargain than her father ever had, and the place under her hands went from a broke old man's failing homestead to something that turned an actual profit, which on that mountain is a small miracle. She learned to do every hard thing herself. She fixed the roof and doctored the stock and shot the wolves that came for the lambs, and once a bear. And she did it all up there alone in the sky with her father's grave green in the spring and white in the winter, tending it. And I have never in my life known a person to be so entirely the master of a thing that had nearly killed them. And Amos, he didn't come down the mountain to her. I want to be honest, because I promised you honest. He was not, in the end, a man built to live in a house with a wife, and I don't believe he ever fully was again after the first one. 9 years alone had made something of him that could not be unmade, only, perhaps, softened at the edge. But there was a thing I noticed, freighting up there over those 11 years, and I noticed it slow, and I never once spoke of it to her, and I only understood it whole toward the end. Her woodpile was always full. Every trip, spring and summer and fall and the first hard edge of winter, her woodpile stood full and split and stacked, more than any woman alone could cut, stacked neat in a way that was not her way of stacking. And there was always, in the cold months, a wolf carcass or 2 hung and skinned that she had not shot. And once, the year the roof went in a March gale while she was down with the fever herself, the fever, of all the cruel echoes, I came up to find the roof already mended, sound and tight, by hands that had not been hers, and her getting well by a fire that someone had kept on the low side, away from the wall where her father had lain, by someone who knew the difference between a fire that's tended and a fire that's giving up. He watched her smoke. All those years, from up the mountain alone in his stitched hides, the man who could not come down to live in the warm, he watched her chimney the way he'd watched it the winter he broke her door, and when it ran thin he came. Not to be seen, not to be thanked. She left coffee out for him on the sill some mornings, and it was always gone, and they never, that I know of, spoke of it once in 11 years. He tended her fire from a distance because that was the only kind of loving a man that ruined had left in him to give, and she let him give it, because she of all people understood that a person who has had everything taken needs badly to be able to give something, even if it's only a full woodpile and a mended roof and a wolf shot in the dark. 2 people keeping fires for each other across 3 miles of mountain, and neither one able to close the distance, and both, in their strange way, entirely at peace with that. I have thought in my old age that we do the young a disservice with the clean version, the one where the strong man breaks the door and stays and the wound heals over neat, because it teaches them that love that doesn't close the distance is love that failed. And I have seen, with my own eyes, over 11 winters of hauling freight up a killing mountain, that it is not so. Some people are too broken to come the whole way in. And they love, those people, in wood piles and mended roofs and coffee gone from a windowsill. And it is real, and it is enough, and it is more than most of the folks safe and warm and frightened down in the flats will ever manage to give anybody. The last time I hauled up there, Eliza met me at the door, the good door, the one she'd hung herself years back, the rough one I'd nailed on long gone to kindling. She was gray at the temples by then and hard-handed and lean, and there was a deep quiet in her that I had learned not to mistake for sadness. We had our coffee. We settled our accounts, and she still drove the harder bargain. And as I was leaving, I looked up the mountain, out of an old habit, and there was smoke on the high slope, thin and far, from a dugout 3 miles up. I said, careful, not looking at her, that it seemed the mountain man was still up there. And Eliza Hartwell looked up at that far thread of smoke a long moment, and I watched her read it the way he'd once read hers, checking it, making sure it ran true and strong and not thin. And then she said, "Well," she said a thing to me then, quiet, that I wrote in my tally book that night and have read every winter since, and it is the last mark in the last of those old books, and I find I don't want to set it down here after all. Some things you keep low, away from the wall. I'll trust you to know the difference.